guys. Tonight I want to talk to you about my dissertation topic, who is Nellie Bly. My dissertation is about the social impacts of Nellie Bly. She was an investigative journalist during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, during the Gilded Age, during a period where women typically did not have respectability. They typically didn't work, especially the elite and upper middle class. Once married, they didn't work at all, or they were expected not to, and had very few options available to them. Now, while these were rapidly changing, they still had limited options available to them. The poor did work in textile mills; they could be laundresses, but still not a lot of options compared to their male counterparts. Nellie Bly, though, did not fit into that mold. She was an investigative journalist who was not afraid of a cutting edge story, would in fact go undercover several times to gain that story. And because of her tactics, because of her ruthlessness, or her capabilities, she would get reforms for mentally ill patients in insane asylums in New York City. She exposed political corruption within New York City. She traveled the world in 72 days. She would later take over her husband's business. Even though that was not a successful adventure for her, she was still a woman in a male dominated role. So it just shows that Nellie Bly was not um, this poor, pitiful woman. She was this strong person in a male dominated society, and she was going to make her mark. So this is one of the reasons why I chose her. But when I began to research her, there were many questions that came about because of this. And one of that is where did Nellie Bly fall in the scope of American journalism? But two, what was her impact because of her reporting? What was her impact on society because of that? And then how did she further um, females' roles in society because of all of her efforts? So those are some of the questions that I haven't that I'm currently researching and hoping to find answers. We'll find some kind of answers for. Historians, though, uh, when they look at the Gilded Age, they tend to talk about the Gilded Age in terms of exploitation and corruption, and pretty much the showing off of new money. So owners are exploiting their workers, they're exploiting resources, um, they're exploiting each other. Um, Progressive historians, typically like Vernon Lewis Parrington, you have Charles A. and Mary Beard, you're also going to have Arthur Schlesinger Sr. They all talk about this exploitation. Parrington says freedom had become individualism, and individualism had become the inalienable right to preempt, to exploit, to squander. The Gilded Age threw itself into the business of money getting. And then Charles A. and Mary Beard, of course, say the same thing. However, they also feel like women were capable, um, and the reasons for women's success were because of their efforts in their organizations. They had men supporting them and wanted to see those changes in the ends of the injustices. So they also see economic change within the country, and the women experienced the gain in the respectability of their profession in society. They wanted to see that change. So, uh, and then you have Arthur Schlesinger, who also would agree with them and say that women were very capable. And then, as the Gilded Age would give way to the Progressive Era, these things are changing very rapidly for women, and they want to see that respectability give way. Then, from the progressive historians, you have the consensus historians, who are basically saying the same thing about the Gilded Age being a period of exploitation, of just corruption. But then you have, like Edward Kirkland, he says in his book Business in the Gilded Age, um, there's a need for a more rounded perspective of those robber barons who exploited the workers. Yes, they were horrific and they were evil, but they also had some good parts in them that needed to be looked at because, for example, Andrew Carnegie was a philanthropist, so he can't be all that bad. Then you have your revisionist historians that basically go on to say, hey, um, they're going to look more into the political aspect of things. Um, then you have this changing over where toward into the 70s, into the 80s, and then into the more modern. And I'm going to take a closer look here into the 2000, the 90s into the 2000s, to the social historians, because we're going to have a shift here where they're going to start looking at women, specifically minority groups, and you're going to have a lot of historians here that are going to talk about, hey, let's look at women and their plight. So women worked, they received a lot less money than they should have. Charles Calhoun talks about this in the Gilded Age Perspectives on the Origins of Modern America. In 2007, he says that women were given a lot less money because the men thought that they only needed pen money for their hats. Historian Rebecca Edwards talks about this in her article. She says, hey, women journalists were great. She references Ida B. Wells and Helen Campbell, and she says they also needed to be looked at. Samuel P. Hay talks about women made strides and gains employment outside the home. They were still limited to the place, um, and women were placed on the lower rungs of the new white collar hierarchy, clustering in jobs demanding the least in skills and offering the least in pay. So again, we're still struggling here. Bill Greer's book, A Dirty Year, Sex, Suffrage, and Scandal in the Gilded Age, talks about how women were just trophy wives and they were made specifically just to marry. And then the last one I want to talk about is actually a shift away from that. It's going to be Susan George Bloomfield, and she talks about in her book, she talks about how women actually had that choice, and they could actually be have a career, or they could stay at home, or they could try to do both. Moving out of the Gilded Age into the Progressive Era. So hopefully this helps you understand a little bit why I think Nellie Bly was such an extraordinary woman in an era where women weren't very respected. Thank you.